We're continuing our series on the Priesthood of all believers with part number 4, God's unique blueprint. We're going to have part 4 today, then we're going to take a couple weeks off from the series with several things coming up the next couple of weeks that are highlights, and then we'll come back to it. So make sure you listen closely and remember, because there will be a test when we all come back for part 5, all right? Samuel Langley. Samuel Langley was a big shot. He was a big deal. He was a professor at Harvard. He held a high office at the Smithsonian Institute, and the government poured what today would be the equivalent of millions of dollars into his research. Anybody know who Samuel Langley is? No one. Not a soul here. He was a huge deal back in his day. He had others that were trying to accomplish the same thing he was. The government wasn't pouring money into their research. The government wasn't funding people to come along and help them. In fact, they had to fund their own research from the income of their bicycle shop. Anybody know who we're talking about now? The Wright brothers. Two guys who had to fund their research into flight from the earnings that they ran at a bicycle shop. Now let me ask you this. If you were going to travel back in time and you couldn't take the knowledge that you know now, and just for sake of argument, you're a betting person, all right? We know you're not, but just for the sake of argument, for this illustration, you're a betting person, and you're going to travel back. Who are you betting on? Samuel or the Wright brothers? You're betting on Langley, right? The odds are stacked in his favor. Everyone knows that this is the foremost expert. This is the guy that is going to finally get us off the ground and into the sky. He's got the money, he's got the intellect, he's got the research, he's got the position, he's got the help. He has everything you would need. You would bet on Samuel Langley, right? And yet, when we look back through the lens of history, we find that it wasn't him that succeeded. It was two brothers who owned a bicycle shop who put in almost $1,000 of their own money into the project. Huge discrepancy. Why did they succeed when the person with all the wealth, talent, gifts, everything didn't? Historians have tried to figure this out, and they've studied this, and so they begin tracking back and looking at it, and there's a couple things they've identified. First of all was the upbringing of the Wright brothers. Their dad was a Protestant minister who believed in educating the mind, and so his book was stocked with all sorts of books. Religious books, secular books, all sorts of, actually, based on my series, you should all correct me right there. I just used a paradigm that is correct or incorrect. Religious versus secular. If you've been listening, where did that come from? Where did the religious versus secular mindset come from? We'll do a little history here, rewind a little bit. It came from the distinction between the clergy and the laity. It came when the church began to push the laity aside and establish the clergy as the only ones who were holy enough, sacred enough to do the work of ministry. And so they separated the clergy into one side, and they're sacred, and the laity into the other, and they're secular or common. All right, so I messed up. So you see how these patterns stick with us. They are just ingrained into us, and we just naturally go there, all right? So as you travel back here to the Wright brothers, we see that there's this one group that these two brothers, they go back, and their dad is a pastor, all right? And so he's got all these different books in his library from all different genres. He's got scientific books, artistic books, novels and history books and all sorts of different things. And he encouraged his kids to read, not so they would make money when they got older, but so that they could develop their intellect and curiosity. He put within them a desire to answer the question why. Now, I know a lot of our kids are gone camping this weekend, but those of you who are here, how often do you ask your parents the question, why? I hear parents laughing, right? That's a question you ask a lot, right? Anybody ask that question to your parents? Why? Why? Go clean your room. Why? Right? You got to wash your hands before you come and eat. Why? Right? Well, this guy actually trained his kids to ask that question. In everything they did, they were educated. He placed within them the desire to ask the question why. So they had a burning desire in whatever they did to answer that question. He wanted them to be curious, to not be satisfied with just coasting along through life, but to ask that question why, to discover that end result. So their dad was focused on that side. On the other side, their mom was educated. She had a college education, and she studied math and science, and she was a gifted mechanic, could do all sorts of things with mechanics. And so the two of them together produced in these two boys not only a desire for knowledge, a desire to answer the question why, but a giftedness, on the other hand, to put it to practical use. And when those two things were married together, it created a dynamic that drove these two boys to pursue flight for a different reason. First of all, they were curious. They were curious as to what was going on. It wasn't because they had a prestigious job. It wasn't because the government was paying them a ton of money. It was because they had this burning desire within themselves, this curiosity that had been implanted in them from the time they were kids to know the reason why. And no one could figure out how to fly, and so they wanted to find out why. Why can birds fly and we can't? How does this whole thing work? And so they were driven by that question. On the other side, the guy with all the money and resources, when the Wright brothers got off the ground first, he up and quit. Well, that and the fact that his first test flight crashed into, I think it was the Potomac River. Right? And so the combination of those two, he said, well, they figured it out, just let them run with it, right? He didn't have the same motivation that they did. Although he had all the resources in the world at his disposal, he didn't have the same motivation. And that motivation was being driven by the insatiable desire to find out the reason why. That becomes important as we go through our message today. I want you to hang on to that thought, knowing the reason why. We're gonna jump into the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 12 today. We've looked at Ephesians, we've looked a little bit at Romans in this series. Today we're going to come to 1 Corinthians 12:1 to look at the subject of spiritual gifts. So what question are we asking about spiritual gifts today? Why? Why? Keep that thought in your mind, all right? Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I do not want you to be ignorant. And then Paul, as he so often does, sidetracks a little bit. We don't have time to jump into a sidetrack. They're often important. But today we're going to skip the sidetrack and jump straight down to verse 4. I don't want you to be ignorant of this. The Father wanted his kids to have a desire to know the truth, to know why, right? And Paul is the same way here. He comes along, I don't want you to be ignorant. I want you to know why. There are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are differences of ministries, but the same Lord. And there are diversities of activities, but it is the same God who works all in all. What's the word you see running through this consistently, this passage? There's different, right? Different or diverse, same word in the original. Diverse and different. But what's the other word that runs through it? Same. Different and same. Now, in our first sermon on this series, we discovered that spiritual gifts being put to use brings about what within the church? Unity, right? Unity and love. That's the focus there in the book of Ephesians. So in Ephesians, it focuses there and builds on that. We saw that in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, right? The result of spiritual gifts is love, right? It all builds towards that. All right, so as we're looking at this, there's two things here in Corinthians in this passage, and it's doing the same thing we saw in Ephesians and the same thing we saw in Romans. There are differences and there are similarities. When it comes to you and I, we are all extremely different from each other, right? There are different gifts. There are different ministries. There are different activities. All of us involved in a lot of different things. But there is one thing that binds us together, and that is the same Spirit, the same Lord, and the same God. We are bound together. In the midst of our differences, in the midst of our diversity, we are bound together because we serve one Lord. He goes on, or actually before we go on, this term gifts, all right? So let's dig in a little bit more there. The Greek word is, anybody recognize that word up there? How would you pronounce that? Charisma, right? In the English, we have a word called charisma. When you think about charisma, what do we generally think of charisma is? If I say she is she has a lot of charisma, what do we think of? Effervescent personality, right? Anybody else? Outgoing, energetic, right? We have this concept, someone who has a lot of charisma, they're passionate, they are captivating, right? They grab your attention. But actually, the word charisma means something totally different. Maybe related, sort of, but actually charisma simply means gracious gift. That's what it means, a gracious gift. So the person who is not energetic, not outgoing, not effervescent, are they also filled with charisma? Are they charismatic personality? Oh, wait a second. Are we allowed to use that term in Adventist church? Is it okay for us to be charismatic? Someone who is charismatic is someone who is filled with gracious gifts. That's what it means in the original. So if you have let's before I go there, what is grace? Is grace something you deserve? Is grace something you get because you have a talent or a personality or something to lay hold of? No. Grace is unmerited favor, right? Those are the big words we use. It means I don't deserve it, but it's given to me anyway. That means that spiritual gifts are something we don't deserve, we don't earn. Charisma, as it were, is a gift that is given to us that we didn't earn. That's really what spiritual gifts are all about. Something that's given to us that we didn't earn. It's given to us as a gift of God's grace. So how many in this room are charismatic this morning? Every single last one of us, right? Every single last one of us is filled with charisma. We didn't earn who we are. God knit us together in our mother's womb, the Bible says, right? He designed us, He formed us, He shaped us. He gave us the gifts of who we are as a gift of grace. Point number one that's important to establish. Spiritual gifts are just that, a gracious gift of God. And every single one of you today can leave here knowing that you are a person of charisma. Filled with charisma, filled with the gracious gifts of God. Now, there's three different areas we see these show up in the Bible. First of all is spiritual gifts, the subject we're looking at this morning. This word, charisma. It shows up here in talking about spiritual gifts. Secondly, it's used when referring to a person's special calling. A little bit different than your giftedness. Your calling, your purpose in life, your purpose in ministry, who God has designed you to be and the role He has designed you to fulfill is the second term, second area that this term is used to describe. And the third area is God's gift of salvation. God's gift of salvation is a gift of charisma. Today we're mainly focused on point number one, but I want you to keep the other two in mind, because what's the main question we're driving for today? Why? I'll give you a hint. It's on the screen. The reason, the why behind spiritual gifts is developed in the other charisma subjects of the Bible. Your giftedness, why did God gift you with the gifts He has given you? It's order to equip you for your special calling, in order that God's gift of salvation may not only be given to you, but flow through you to others. Let's continue on now. Verse 8. For to one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit, to another the word of knowledge through the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit. To another, gifts of healings by the same Spirit. So let's start making a list here, right? We have, what's the first one? Wisdom. And not just wisdom that you keep to yourself. It's the word of wisdom. It's like a spoken wisdom. You give it to others, right? You share it with others. So the word of wisdom. Through who? The Spirit. To another, the word of what? Knowledge. Wisdom and knowledge are two different things, right? There's a lot of highly educated people who aren't filled with wisdom. So we have a lot of knowledge, but when it comes to wisdom, yeah, that's a whole other story, right? They're two different things. All right, so who gives the word of knowledge? Same Spirit, right? Again, diversity, unity. Diversity, similarity. To another, what's the next gift? Wait a second. Different gifts for different people. How does that work? Don't all of us need to have faith? Or do you have faith for me? Are some given faith that takes care of my lack of faith? This is where it gets a little more complex, okay? So let's take and break it down this way. First of all, we all have gifts, right? And those gifts are different from one person to the next. So there's another gift in, I think it's in Romans, the gift of prayer. Some are gifted with the ability to pray, but all Christians are called to pray, right? We all want to have a relationship with God. If you think about it this way, it's like, is it okay if I use a stereotype? It's a stereotype that, generally speaking, is proven to be statistically true. Men speak a lot less than women. We've just got less words to say, all right? This seems to be the way it just works out most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. All right, so we all speak, though, right? But in this illustration, in this stereotype, we would say that the ladies have the gift of speaking. The guys, well, we do our best, right? Oftentimes making a mess out of communication because we're not as gifted. So while at a basic level, we all have the gift of faith, some are gifted with a faith that works way more and is way stronger than the rest of us and is meant to be a service to the body of Christ. So we're all given enough faith maybe to connect ourselves with God, right? But not all of us have enough faith to serve the rest of the body, to make up for the lack that lives within us. Does that kind of make sense on the differences? Well, there's a basic foundation where we all pray and all have a connection with God. Have you ever heard amazing, incredible sermons on prayer, and you're like, man, why is my prayer life not like that? And you might start to feel guilty. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe there's something wrong in my life, or why is it not working? Have you ever thought that maybe the difference is those people have the gift of prayer. I've got the struggle of prayer, right? I'm learning to communicate, to have a relationship with God, and that's important and vital. But there are people who are just uniquely gifted. When they open their mouths to pray, the eloquence just pours out. And there's an effectiveness to their prayer. There's visible physical answers that show up in real time that are a blessing for the body that some of us may not experience and see like others. There's a distinction between the spiritual discipline of prayer and the giftedness of prayer. There's a difference between the spiritual discipline of faith and the giftedness of faith. To another is given gifts of healings, right? A lot of us can't heal. In fact, if you cut yourself, better not come to me. I'll make a mess out of you. Go to someone who knows how to heal. All right, it goes on. To another, the working of miracles. This is one that is a little more challenging. Who would say they have the gift of miracles? Don't raise your hand this morning. This one's a little more challenging. The gift of miracles. Is this a gift that God has taken away? No. We still hear stories. We still see it present in our world, but it's not as commonplace. That brings up an important point. There's about 21 gifts, specific gifts the Bible lists. But it's not the whole of the giftedness that God gives. Illustration. Back in Bible days, did they have technology like we do today? Did they need to have someone who was gifted with the ability to know how to use computers to be able to get the words up on the screen for all of us? No, they didn't have that, right? Did they have a need for someone to run the soundboard and make sure that sound is good so all of us can hear, and that the broadcast going out over live feed is broadcast so that those who can't be here can hear, right? They didn't need that back in those days. That's a gift that God has given because it meets a need in the present context we live in. So just because a gift is not listed in the Bible doesn't mean it's not a spiritual gift. God adds gifts and places them as needed. To another are given discerning of spirits. To another, different kinds of tongues. To another, the interpretation of tongues. We see these different gifts that God places among us. Some may have 2 or 3 gifts. Some may have 4 or 5. Some of us may only have 1. Good news, if you have 1, you're only responsible to use that 1. We'll get to a question on that here in a minute. Not a minute, in a second. How to say no without guilt. Have you ever gotten a call from the nominating committee or like here, the ministry placement team, and you've been asked to do something and you just didn't feel like you could do it and you felt guilty to say no? Anybody ever been there? We got a bunch of people who know how to say no in this church without feeling guilty. Maybe I don't need to preach this section of the sermon. We'll just skip it, all right? Have you ever felt guilty because you said no to someone? I think most of us have been there. How do you know when to say no and not have guilt about it? This subject we're studying gives us the answer. Notice what verse 11 says. But one and the same Spirit works all these things. So one Spirit is behind all the different gifts and distributes to each one individually as the Spirit wills. So if the Spirit has not given you the gift of prayer and you're asked to be on the prayer team and you say yes, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Spiritual gifts-wise. You are trying to serve in an area that God has not gifted you for. You are spending time and energy. Likely you're going to get frustrated in that ministry because it's not going well and it's not lining up with who God created you to be and how he designed you to work. So now you are spinning your wheels, spending your time in a ministry that God has not gifted for you for, and you are not able to serve in an area that requires the gift of faith, let's say, because you're spending your time in a ministry that's not according to your giftedness. Are you with me this morning? God has given us different gifts intentionally, this says. The Spirit has designed you to be who you are, given you gifts unique to you to fulfill a certain role within the body of Christ. If we say yes to everything we're asked to do, more than likely we are ministering outside the area of our giftedness. Not only does that hurt those we're ministering to, because we're not really good at what we're doing, we're not gifted for that, but it hurts those we're not able to minister to because we've said yes to too many things, and what we are gifted at is falling by the wayside. Are we together this morning? So, this is a terrible thing for me to say because we're getting ready to start the ministry placement, cycle that we're coming up on here. You don't have to feel guilty saying no. You don't have to feel guilty saying no. Make sure you understand how God has gifted you individually. How God has designed you and wired you, your passions, your interests, and your gifts all align together to form who you are and where you should be serving within the body of Christ. Now, some of you may be sitting here thinking, well, I don't know what my gifts are. Others of you may have learned through the years of our experience what works and what doesn't, right? There's some gifts that are pretty immediately obvious. Singing, right? If you stand up in front of church to sing, you're going to find out pretty soon if you have that gift or not. Maybe within 5 or 10 seconds. Right? Music is one of those gifts that is somewhat self-evident. Now, you can take classes and learn over time, right? So, but that's one of those gifts. Now, if you brought your car to me and asked me to fix your car, you're in serious trouble, my friend. Right? Go down to the Rodriguez's shop, have them fix your car. They have gifts there in those areas. They've got people they've hired that have gifts in that area, right? It'll take me forever to figure it out, and I'll probably mess it up. We need to be ministering within the area of our giftedness, how the Spirit has designed us and called us. If you don't know what your gifts are, if you don't know how God has designed you, here in 2 or 3 weeks, here at the end of June, we're actually going to come together as a church, and we're going to help you to figure out your giftedness. How has God gifted you and designed you? So don't just think I'm throwing this out there and we're going to leave you hanging and you just got to go out and Okay, now what do I do? And we're going to actually go through this together, give you an opportunity to discover your not just your gifts. God will give you gifts. He will give you passions. He'll give you interests that will all come together and align together in order to help you see where God is calling you to serve him in ministry. All right, so the Spirit gives to each one individually as he wills. So say yes in the areas where you're gifted, you're passionate, where God has called you to because of that. Say no in those areas where he hasn't given you gifts. And let guilt be kicked out the back door. There we go. I need 4 helpers. 4 helpers. I got 1 right here. Come on up. 3 more helpers. Young, middle-aged, old, it doesn't matter. I just need 4 helpers. Got 1. Go ahead. Come on up here. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to, all right? So if that takes away some of the stage fright, I need 3 more. Well, all right, come on up. Got 1 more. I need 2 more. 2 more helpers. All right, 1 more. 1 more helper. All right, we got our 4. Come on up. All right, we got 4 helpers here. Now, on the screen behind me is a picture of what? Fire truck. All right, each one of these 4 is going to have a different set of gifts, a different set of talents, and is going to have a different role on the fire truck. Are you with me? Now, I want you to pay close attention because we're going to test you guys on this. Who here should be our driver for the fire truck? All right. We have someone who already knows his gifts and callings. He doesn't need a test. He doesn't need anything else. He knows where he's gifted. Okay. All right. Good driver. Okay, so you're going to be our driver. You're going to turn this way. The front of the truck's headed out that door. All right? So you're headed that way. All right, we got our driver. Now, we need to have someone who is alert and paying attention so that when you're coming up to an intersection where there's a bunch of traffic, they are going to blare that siren good and loud to make sure you're there. Okay, all right. So we got our siren person here, all right? Siren person here. Now, we need someone who can hang on to the end of a fire hose with water blasting through it. That's you? Okay, all right, you're going to get here. Now, we need someone else who is extremely supportive and alert and watching, because when that guy opens the end of the hose, the rest of the hose starts whipping around, right? And so we need someone to hang on to the hose so it doesn't knock you off your feet and throw you to the side, right? We want to get the water on the fire, all right? So we're going to have you are very helpful, firsthand experience with that, very helpful. And so you're going to keep an eye out for him, and if he gets ready to get hurt because that hose starts, you're grabbing the hose, holding it in place for him, all right? All right, so we've got them all lined up. Fire bell rings in the station. They get in the truck to head out. Now, I want to see how well you listened. What is his purpose? What is her purpose? What is his purpose? What is her purpose? You're all wrong. Their purpose is to put out the fire, friends. All right, thank you guys. You can go sit down. They all are different. They all have different roles, but they have one purpose. The why of why they are together. The why of why they are brought together. Their purpose is to put out the fire and save lives. Are you with me? That was a dirty trick, I know. But that's important. It's the reason the why is the important thing. If we're just caught up in what our gifts are and we're trying to serve with our gifts to find a role and just be burning ourselves up in serving in that role, without the end of the why, we're going to burn ourselves out, even if we are serving according to our giftedness. You've got to know the why of why you're serving. And in this case, the Bible makes it clear for us. In this case, the Bible shares with us very clearly why we are called. We have our gifts. Then God places us in our calling, in our role. And in the end, that is to accomplish our unified purpose. And what is that purpose? 1 Peter 2:9 says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, so that," here's the why, here's what the reason for it is, "you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." So you may take the love of God that he has poured out on you from heaven, that he has placed within you, that free gift of salvation, that free gift of his divine love, and you are able to pour that out to others around you to bring light into their darkness, to bring love into their loneliness, to share God and praise him to the world around us who so drastically needs him. You are a chosen generation. When you were kids, did you ever go out on the playground and line up in a line to choose up teams for a game? Anybody remember those days? You go out there and you line up in the line, and you get ready, and it depends on the game you're playing. Some games you may know you're going to be one of the first ones chosen, right? How's that feel? How's that feel to be one of the first ones chosen, right? Feels good, right? I'm wanted, I'm desired, I'm good at this, right? But then other games, you may not be at the head of the line. You may be chosen at the very end of the line, right? How does that feel? How does that feel? Not very good, right? I'm not desired, I'm not wanted, I'm not any good at this, right? The cool thing about spiritual gifts is God tells us that you are chosen first. Every single time. No matter what your gifts or talents are. God has chosen you before you were born. He has designed you and created you to fulfill the purpose that He has for you in His church. You are His church. In His ministry, let me rephrase that. God has designed you. He has chosen you. He has called you. He looks at you and He says, you are exactly perfect for what I need you to do. You are exactly gifted to be the person that I want playing second base on my softball team, right? I have designed you and perfected you. I have shaped you, and what you lack, I will equip in you to fulfill the calling that I have for you. We are each and every one of us chosen. It doesn't matter what our gifts and talents are. You are all charismatic. You are all people of charisma because God has placed His gifts in you to fulfill a purpose, and there is no one else on this planet that is uniquely equipped just like you to fulfill that purpose that God has for you. As we sing this closing song, I want you to hear God's voice speaking to your heart, saying, you are exactly who I designed you to be. You are chosen. You are created. You are gifted to be the individual I created you to be, and I need you. I am calling you to serve not outside of your giftedness, but exactly as the person I designed you to be in order to bring the love of God into this world and to touch those around us.